Hey everybody, hope that you're doing well. Today we have a big project. So we have 40 pounds of beef fat that we have to process. So what I will be doing once I have processed this down to tallow is we'll be making candles, soap, skincare, as well as just saving it to cook with. So all around this is a fantastic haul, and I'll show you how to wet render it so that it will help to remove the odor when you're using it. Because of course if you're using this in a lot of skin products, you don't really want to be smelling like beef. I mean, it's up to you, but it does take quite a bit of work to get it to the point where you do want to be using it on your skin. Whenever you do use a better quality of fat, animals that have been fed better and just don't have a lot of toxins in their system, that gives you a really, really clean fat to use. So that means that you're not going to have to process it as many times to get it to a state where it's usable.
So when you're getting everything set up to process your meat, be sure not to wash the meat beforehand because one, it will get fat down your drain, and also it makes it a lot harder to handle.
Now we're just going to trim off all of the meat pieces and grind up the fat. So we just want to go ahead and remove any of the meat pieces like this, because if we let this cook into the oil, it's going to contribute to the meat flavor. So we can just go ahead and cut this off. You can cook it up and eat it or feed it to your animals. Okay, so we've got a few chunks of fat here. Now we'll just begin grinding it up. If you don't have a grinder, you can just cut it up into small chunks. The smaller, the better.
Also, even though you want your meat half frozen when you're cutting it because it makes it easier, it is a lot easier for it to be thawed when you're grinding it up. So just do your best to gauge the middle between those.
Okay, so our bowl is getting pretty full here with the fat. I'm most of the way through the tray here. So I'm going to go ahead and get this into the pot and this cleaned up a bit. I need to get these meat scraps into the refrigerator because they're definitely thawed out. So that is something that you need to keep in mind if you are working with a lot of meat. Just make sure that things are being at the temperature that they should be. So I'm going to put that up, and then these are still half frozen, so they're fine for now as long as I get through them quickly. So now that we have covered that, we are just going to pop on over to our pots of water so that I can show you how to do a wet rendering to make fat into tallow. Alright, so I have my pots of water here set to a very low heat. Everything is on a low simmer. You don't want your mixture here to be getting above the temperature of 225 degrees Fahrenheit. That is stovetop or in the oven. I just have the plate here. This helps it keep from splashing since I have the water here already. That I have the fat dumped in there, I'm just going to take a good amount of salt and sprinkle over the top. So adding the salt into it just helps draw out all of those impurities, and you can use any kind of salt. This is a pink Himalayan salt, but any of them will do just fine. Okay, so now I'm just going to keep this on a very low heat and stir it every so often and let it simmer for the next few hours. Alright, well, I think that you guys get the general idea of how to put the fat into the pot now, so I'm just going to get all of this wrapped up and work through it as quickly as I can, but I am going to keep a count of how many of those metal bowls that I fill up just like that. So I will update you guys when I get to the end of this and show you how everything cooks along the way.
Now I'm just going to talk about things that I wish that I did differently. So in this moment, I wish that I had started filling up one pot at a time rather than spreading it out over the pots in the beginning. So here you'll see me put salt over top of these as I'm putting the meat in. Each time I start a new pot with fresh meat, I'll add salt over top so that it will draw out the impurities and help it separate from the oil. Now, at this point, I did get really tired of cutting meat, so you'll see here in a second, I did come back at a later time and the meat is mostly cooked. So I add the meat into this pot, and I wish that I had done this into a separate pot because this has been 3 or 4 hours simmering and it's mostly done at this point. You don't want to cook meat more than 12 hours when you are rendering down the fat because it can impart a bad taste to it. So you can see how having separate cook times on the meat that you've added into your pot can create a problem there. Also, if you get a lot of the oil that has started to solidify on top, you might want to increase the heat just a smidge. I did not, but you probably should. It took a really long time to cook down the amount of meat that I put into this pot.
So it is time for an update now. So I've been at this for about 5 hours and I'm through 3 of the 5 packs. Now, that being said, I've been taking a lot of breaks because it is kind of hard on your wrist and cutting all the meat and all that. But we will talk about what I have on the stove here now. So in this pot, I have 3 bowls of fat with lots of water, and this one is cooking down quite a bit slower than what we have in this pot. So originally I had this split into 2 separate pots. So I had 1 bowl of fat per pot and it cooked down way, way quicker, which is fine, but it is done now. So it's time to strain this out. As you can see, I've scooped out pretty much all of the meat. There's a little bit left in there that I'm going to try and keep getting out. Maybe you can see the little spots, but whatever I don't get will sink to the bottom, and when this solidifies, I can just scrape it off.
So at this point, it's probably about 6 p.m. and I'm starting a new pot here. And you'll see me add more salt because it's a new pot here in a second. So I've got 1.5 bowls in there, and then you can see me add the other half and more salt to this pot, and then I'll come back and add another bowl there. So I did let those cook for several hours, and you'll see on the clock in a second that it is midnight now. I don't recommend that you do this or that you start a project like this at lunchtime. If you're going to have a big day of preservation, probably start in the morning time. So we are now in day 2, as you can see, and here I am scraping off the top. Here I should have scraped off the top and had like a separate scrap pile because you can see that there are little meat pieces on top. So you would want to scrape those off and not just throw them in with this pot like I'm doing. So I was not very good at cleaning that up, but it got the job done nonetheless after several more steps. So you'll see me continue to clean that up and cram that all into there. That one actually came out really good. This is the pot that I had combined the 2 ones that were cooking down separately. They did cook down quickly, and this one actually had the best smell to it. So like it didn't have very much odor to it at all. And then here you can see that I'm squeezing out the remnants that are left in the pot. That's fine. You want to save those, but I should have put those separately. So I'll start doing that later, but I didn't do it in that case. And again, on this day, I did not scrape the tops like I should have. You can see little meat pieces on the top. And also, the more oil that you put into your pot, the harder that it is going to be for you to tell if there's stuff floating. So I actually thought that this had cooked down completely, and it turned out that there was a lot of meat just stuck down in the bottom of the pot that I could not tell was there because it was so far beneath the oil. So this layer of oil ended up being, I think, about 2.5 inches or 3 inches. I don't recommend that you do more than 6 pounds in a pot. So I believe that's how much fat I got into this one. 4 pounds really seemed to be a good amount to cook at one time in one single pot. But also at the same time, you see, I did not strain this, and I should have because this is bad. So I scraped all of this off the best that I could. I'm definitely going to have to render this again and clean it up. So whenever you're messing with a lot of oil like this, make sure that you don't wash your hands like down your drain. Wipe the oil off with a paper towel or something. And I definitely recommend that you have a hand washing station outside, even if you can. Now I'm just taking that nasty pot and heating it back up because there's a lot of oil and fat in there and I need to get it separated. So I'm just melting it down so that I can come back and strain it out. So here you'll see me come in with a little hand strainer because I didn't want to pull out the cheesecloth. And I didn't want to at first, but then I later found out I didn't even have enough. So I did later on end up breaking down and getting more cheesecloth, which ultimately I recommend straining with cheesecloth in the beginning. This took a really long time, and although it was effective, it still left a lot of gunk that I would have to scrape off later. As you can see, I'm just putting all of those meat scraps into the Dutch oven, and I'm going to pop that in the refrigerator for the rest of the day because this is the end of day 2, and we are about to be moving into day 3 here in a second. You can see I've got a good mess to clean up. It is now day 3, and these have been in the refrigerator overnight. You can see that that still looks really soft, like mashed potatoes. That was after like 12 hours in the refrigerator, so it may need a couple of days to fully solidify, depending on how warm the water was when you put it in the refrigerator, how thick of a layer of oil that you have in there. Otherwise, you can just pop it in the freezer for a few hours, and it'll come out in a really nice disc to where you can functionally scrape it. Here, I'm just wrapping it up in aluminum foil because I needed something to store this stuff in. Make sure you have like plastic bags, Tupperware, foil, something if you're working with a lot of oil so that you can put it in the freezer or the refrigerator, wherever you're going to be storing it. It is also shelf stable once you get it purified. This second one turned out a lot better. So it was a thinner layer, and also the shape of the bowl on this one was really helpful for getting it out in a single disc. So you'll commonly see people use those really nice metal bowls to do this, and I think that that will be a good investment if you're going to be doing this a lot, or even if you have those, use them for this project. They work so well when you're trying to pull everything out if it doesn't break apart like that. I'm just scraping everything off, and this is getting closer to how it should be done. I still didn't scrape both sides of this. So I'll do that on probably like the very last one that I do, but just make sure that you scrape both sides and even the outer rim. And there are not a lot of oil scraps floating around in here, so I'll just dump that in the woods far away from our house because it'll attract predators with the oil smell. And I scrape the side of the bowl to remove any of that excess oil, and I'll put that into a scrap pile to where that will be rendered again on its own because there's a lot of meat in there. So here we are on to the next pot. Okay, so we've got more mashed potato fat here. So if you touch the top of your tallow and it's still soft, leave it in the refrigerator longer or put it in the freezer and let it solidify, because although you will remove some of the solids this way, ultimately you're still going to be accruing those in there and not removing as many as you possibly can. So you're going to have to render it and purify this more times. So this wasn't too bad, but still, I should have let that solidify and scraped it. Just wrapping this one up as well. And something I do recommend is placing your fat or your sheets, whatever you're doing, on a cookie sheet or something that has sides, because there will be a lot of water that's running out of this. So be prepared to catch that in some way, shape, or form. So now I'm just pulling out the cast iron pot out of the refrigerator, and we're going to bake this because this is not completely rendered. And although I don't necessarily recommend rendering it for as long as I did and then doing a second render like this, I was not prepared to waste the scraps. So I did render this for several hours and actually got at least 1 or 2 pounds of tallow left from that. So that was a pretty good idea, I think, in my opinion. But I am keeping those separately to use those only for cooking because it definitely does have more of a beef taste. So if you're going to be using it for cooking, I'd say it's a good idea. Who cares? But if you're going to be using it for other crafts like tallow or skincare, it's best if you can have the purest form of the tallow. We're still on day 3 for this pot. This is just the one that I rendered in the oven, and I stuck it into the freezer for a few hours after it got done. So now we're just popping that out to see what it looked like. And I don't think that I actually had any water in the bottom of this. So if you do that, I'd recommend just pouring in some water over top of it before putting it into the refrigerator to solidify, because it'll make it a little bit easier to pop out. Yeah, having water in there will also help remove some of those solids, or at least help them separate from the oil. So those would have been floating in the water for the most part if I had added some water into it, rather than being stuck in there. So you can see how some of them are really kind of stuck in there, and I'm going to have to scrape off a lot of that. And again, all of that fat that's going back into the pot, I'm going to melt that down here in a second, and then we're going to reprocess that fat again. Alright, so now that that is all melted down, I'm going back in and hand straining this some more. And ultimately, again, I really wish that I just went and got the cheesecloth from the beginning. It would have saved me so much trouble and been way cleaner from the start. So if you're thinking about doing this, just get the dang cheesecloth and don't try to do the hand straining, especially if you're going to be doing a lot. If it's just a little bit, you'll probably be fine. But on this scale, it would have saved me so much work to just strain it out effectively from the beginning. So now that that melted down and got strained out, I did pop it back into the freezer for a couple of hours just to get it to where we could strain it out like this. So that's going in its own little separate thing, and I will add that back into the scrap pile because there's still a little bit of meat in there, but I just wanted to get it mostly clean and a majority of the meat processed out of the scrap stuff, which I'm calling it scrap, but it's just going to be processed more times or in the first batch of the next tallow that I do. Okay, so now we are moving on to day 4, and we have mini tallow loaves to work through and to continue to refine. So what I'm doing here is just adding in as much as I feel like I can get into my pot. And at this point, you do not have to add salt. You can be completely done with that. I'll only add that at this point if I see a lot of meat in something. Again, that's just going to help clarify everything. And by the way, whenever we are doing these second and third rounds of clarifying, all you have to do is just melt the oil down on like a medium heat, not too high, like a low medium, but you don't have to cook it as low as you did when you were rendering it. So you only have to melt it down until you can see through and it's that nice golden yellow color. Now, something I did talk about a little bit when I was removing the scrapings and having to render those separately. Of course, you want to do that, but also if you're working with multiple batches and they're turning out a little bit differently, like this batch has a little bit more of an odor than this other batch, keep those separate as well, and you can store them separate. And because the more that you have an odor, the more that you're going to have to refine it. So, of course, if you keep those separate, then you don't have to refine the ones that don't have much of an odor. So I'm still just continuously adding in chunks of oil to melt down. Probably shouldn't have done as much. Again, the thinner layers seem to do a little bit better. I would say 1 inch to 1.5 inches is gold. And that usually ends up being about 2 pounds to 4 pounds, depending on the diameter of your pot. So now I've been melting these down on a low medium for a few minutes. This won't take long, so don't walk away. And I'm just straining out the little bit of solids that are left out. I'm trying with my hand strainer again, and at this point, I gave up on that. And I got the cheesecloth out. I usually don't like using it because it falls into the side of the bowl. So I just grabbed some hair clips and put them onto the side of this. This is my pressure canner, so it does have a lip on the side that is able to hold the clips. So just be mindful, like these are plastic, and if that were to fall into that hot water and oil, that's a lot of microplastics that are going to go into that batch, and I would probably have to throw it out if it melted into it. So if you're going to be using plastic, make sure it's completely cold, so if it drops in there, it doesn't melt and you can grab it, or maybe use metal clips if you're going to be trying to do something similar to this. Now here, this batch, this is from the part that I dry rendered, and it did have a little bit of a different color. So it is more of like a pinkish grayish tint, whereas the other stuff definitely had more of a yellow tint. So they are easy to tell apart, and this also had more of a beefy smell. So I would say that a wet rendering is definitely the most effective way for getting a clean batch of tallow. Now, if you're going to be cooking with it, again, this is a great way to actually give your tallow flavor. So it just depends on what you're going to be doing with it and what your end goal is. So there's a little bit of meat in there, so I decided to add some salt to that batch just to help refine it some more. And this is what we're looking at the end of day 4. So finally here on day 5, we'll get to do some satisfying scrapes. So again, at this point, I'll learn to let the blocks completely solidify before trying to do anything. I'm scraping all the nasty gunk off. And today is actually the day that I learned to scrape both sides and the outer rim. I'm not sure that I did it on this block, but I know that I did it on the rest of them. Also, I did find that a butter knife going around the edge works a little bit better than trying a spoon or anything else. And if you're lucky and using a tapered bowl, you can actually just kind of press down and it'll pop out. But this one was a little bit softer. This is one of the pots that I put way too much oil in. That's also a big reason why I have a lot of separation where there are solids on top and on the bottom. Because if you have such a thick layer of oil that this stuff is having trouble, going through it, it's got to settle somewhere. So as long as it's not in the middle and I can scrape it off, that's fine. But still, it works a little bit better if you do it in slightly less thick layers. I'm just doing more scraping here. I won't show all of the scraping for day 5 just because it's not as interesting. And day 6, our final day, they're going to look really nice and crisp and clean. So I'll just show you the basics of what it's looking like, how we still have little specks, and how you should be scraping it. And then day 6, we'll do a final reveal of all of the little slabs that we've accumulated. So here you may be able to see the color difference. On the left, we have the dry rendered, and on the right, we have the wet rendered. And then that plate was just scraps. So I'm just cleaning the pots here, warm up the water, and then dump it, and then wipe it down with a paper towel. And of course, don't dump the water down your drain. Dump it outside or something else that you can figure out to where it won't go down the drain, because the oil will build up and clog it up. So now I've just filled my pot with water, and I'm just adding in the tallow pieces, keeping the dry rendered separate from the wet rendered because they have different smells. So this is going to be I believe, fourth overall render. There were a couple of them that had a couple of extra renders in between trying to get everything clean. But so we are just going to do this one last time, and then I will be putting it up. But you can definitely do it as many times as you need to get it to the smell that you want. So now I'm just filling up another pot, and I did find out, if you're like me and we're a little impatient and the tallow is soft, if you put it on something like the aluminum foil and dump it in, it does make it a little bit easier rather than scooping it out with a spoon. It also helps you kind of scrape the aluminum foil when you have all of that excess on there. But I wasn't too worried about losing a teaspoon here and there. It made it easy for cleanup to just having something that I could throw away. So I did put a little bit too much in that wok there, so I felt like I needed to transfer some of it over to this pot. And now with our final render, we're just going to melt everything down. So you can see 3 of the 4 are done. The 3 on the left are golden and clear, and then you can see that one just changed. When it's cloudy like it was before, you want to keep clarifying it just a little bit. So this is perfect, and now we can turn off the heat and let it sit and cool, and then refrigerate or freeze. And be sure that you don't freeze it overnight, because then you're just going to freeze the water that's underneath it as well, and it makes it a little bit hard to deal with. So in the freezer for like 6 hours or less, and then refrigerate however long you need to. Well, up to a couple of days before having to process it. So as you can see here, we've been through at least 4 different full renderings with these to purify them, and it looks so much better. So these are a typical like whitish color rather than yellow or pink. So that is a sign that it is purified. And on the top surface that I'm scraping, there's just barely a color difference. So I need my pots and pans back now, so I'm putting these up in the freezer this go around because they are pure enough for me to use in cooking. But as I pull these out for small batches and soaps or things that I want to use them more for skincare, I am going to be probably doing a quick double render just to be able to deal with them in smaller batches. But as long as you're happy with the smell and the color, you can go ahead and put that up. I would say probably after 3 renderings, you would be safe to do so, as long as things are coming out clean. I, on the other hand, definitely did give myself some more work by not just straining out with the cheesecloth to begin with. So that is a lesson learned. But anyway, this was such a fun project to do, and I don't know if I'll do 40 pounds at one time again. I wouldn't be surprised if I do, or even more. So I won't say that I won't, but regardless, I've had tons of fun, and I do actually have a couple of cleaning tips for you guys as we close this out. So you can actually use, so say you have a cutting board, you can use salt and a couple of drops of water and a paper towel and just kind of exfoliate that and add salt as needed, a lot like you would with cast iron. So, and also the tallow is really great for moisturizing the wood cutting boards, by the way. I was really happy with my knife and my cutting board by the end of this. And if that is not doing it for you, or if you don't have wood surfaces to clean, other ways are through vinegar. You can use like a 50-50 alcohol mix. That worked great for me. So if you've seen one of my last videos of the all-purpose alcohol extraction, I use that for a lot of the degreasing and the cleanup for the counters, floor, and the stove after it was cooled. And that actually did work really, really great. And it smelled really, really good because my house was smelling a little bit beefy, or at least in the kitchen area by the time I got done with this. So it's a great degreaser and a great smell buster. So you can check that out if you haven't. Otherwise, I definitely recommend it for this project. And I need to mention whenever you are ready to store your tallow, so you can store it shelf stable. So say you put it in a jar and let it kind of seal. You don't need to can it, but you can kind of hot seal it and it will be shelf stable for up to 1 year. You can store it in the refrigerator for 12 to 18 months or in the freezer for up to 3 years. So this stores for a really long way, no matter which way you do it. You just want to make sure that you have all of the contaminants out because that will contribute to bacteria growth and make it spoil if you don't. So, anyway, I hope that you guys have a great day and that this was helpful to you and that you are also able to learn from my mistakes. Well, that is going to be it for today's video. If you are new to the channel and would like to see more content like this or gardening, houseplants, stuff like that, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. And thank you all for watching. I hope that you have a great day. Bye.